السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلله فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد. The topic that has been assigned to me for today is entitled Perfect Justice, Debunking the Male Bias Myth. In other words, the topic is about explaining to non-Muslims, and in our times even many Muslims, why is it that there are so many gender-specific rules, gender-different rules in Islam? Why do our women have to wear hijab and not men? Why is it that a man is allowed to practice polygamy and not women? Why is it that the inheritance is different? Why? So many questions arise from non-Muslims, and even in our times from many Muslims. They're questioning the fundamentals of their religion, the fundamentals of fiqh, the fundamentals of usul, the fundamentals of male-female interactions, and they're wondering, why is our religion so different from what we see around us today, from the environment we have been raised in? And so I'm trying to explain in this talk, in a nutshell, our proper methodology of response. How do we respond to these allegations? Somebody comes and tells us Islam is a very chauvinistic religion. It's a sexist faith. It prefers men over women. And they list a number of things, such as polygamy, such as hijab, such as inheritance, such as this and that, witnesses in the court. And they list a number of things, and they say, look at this type of religion. It's making women backward, and it's promoting male chauvinism and making men better than women. How do we respond to these allegations? How do we defend our faith from these accusations? Now the topic that I'm talking about is very common. It's very common. You've heard it so many times, of women's rights in Islam. In fact, I might even go so far as to say that this has become a staple topic for many conventions and many speakers. So much so that an average talk that is advertised with this topic in mind will not even generate a great response, because it's cliched. Been there, done that. I've heard this conversation before. So let me reassure you that although the topic might indeed be very common, in fact one of the most common topics at Muslim conventions and gatherings, let me be so bold as to state that the response you will hear today, insha'Allah ta'ala, is a very, very unique response. It is a response that is rarely heard. It is a response that I personally believe is a much better and perfect response than the traditional, than the stereotypical response that is given to this question. Because, and I claim perhaps very boldly, and I will justify this claim, that the traditional methodology of responding to these allegations, by traditional methodology I'm referring to answers that all of you know. Why is it that a woman is allowed to have more than, a man is allowed to have more than one wife and a woman isn't? Well, because during times of war, it is men who die and the women are more numerous, because there's orphans, because, more widowers. Why is it that, the inheritance is more for the man versus the woman? Well, because the man has more financial obligations than the woman. So you have these, stereotypical responses, okay? And I state quite boldly, and I will defend this, insha'Allah, that these responses have not, cannot, and will not succeed in doing justice to our religion. These traditional responses, they will not succeed in solving this bias, in solving this perception that non-Muslims, and unfortunately many Muslims who are not grounded in the religion, have of our religion with regards to male and female interactions. First though, let me digress a little bit. Let me tell you a little bit about Muslim historiography and about some of the clashes that Muslim culture has had with other cultures. This is because it is not the first time in the history of the Ummah where our culture, our civilization, our thought has come into contact with other thoughts and has been influenced, for the better or for the worse, by those thoughts. No. It has happened many times before. We've been around 1,400 years. It's not the first time we're interacting with other civilizations. It's not the first time we're hearing concepts, we're hearing ideas that are not found in our religion. They're found in other faiths and other cultures. So let me digress and let me summarize for you one such encounter that occurred. Because the encounter, when we analyze it and when we study it with other civilizations and cultures, it is the same as what is happening now. It's not the first time we've been exposed to cultures that are deemed superior to our own. One of the first encounters that the Muslims had of the past was their encounter with Greek philosophy. This occurred within the first 150 to 200 years of Islam. For the first time, Muslims got exposed to a theology that was based upon other principles, not based upon the Qur'an and Sunnah. And Greek mysticism and Greek theology and Greek philosophy was perceived to be, in fact it still is perceived to be, far more superior than religious philosophies. To this day, here in America, 3,000, 4,000, 2,000 years after these philosophers lived, in our undergraduate schools we study their works. We study Plato, Socrates, Aristotle. We study the ancient Greek wisdom and how it was passed to the Romans and so on and so forth. There was no exception back then. And that's when the Muslims came across this mine of information. They were overwhelmed by what they perceived to be a superior culture, a superior thought. And so Muslims of that time reacted in various ways. You had one group amongst them who later became known as the Islamic philosophers, the philosophers of Islam. You had one group amongst them who took these ideas of Greek philosophy and they swallowed them hook, line, and sinker. Completely. All they did was that they changed the words. Aristotle referred to God as the prime mover, the unmoved mover. For Aristotle, God was nothing other than the first cause. That was who he was. Aristotle had no concept of worship, of loving this God, of praying to Him, of a God that interacts with us, that feeds us, that nourishes us. No. For Aristotle, the God was the unmoved mover, the prime mover. When these Muslims took Aristotelian philosophy and they transferred it into Arabic, all they did was that instead of saying the prime mover, they said Allah. But the net result was the same. If you were to ask these philosophers to describe this God that they had called Allah, and you look at their works, and they are still around, these works. If you were to ask these Muslim philosophers, who is this being that you call Allah? Is He merciful? Is He our creator? Is He the one who provides what we need? Is He the one whom we have to worship? For the philosophers, the Muslim philosophers, the answer to all of these questions would be a resounding no. No. The Muslim philosophers did not believe that Allah created us. They said matter is eternal. God does not create matter. To this day in thermodynamics, modern thermodynamics, there is a maxim, a principle, a theorem. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. Matter cannot be created or destroyed. Rather, it can only transfer from one form to another. And of course, the famous Einstein's equation, E equals mc squared. Basically, you are correlating matter with energy. Is that matter and energy are correlated. There is a constant amount of energy and matter, and they cannot increase and decrease. For Muslims, no. Matter can and is created and destroyed. Allah creates it, Allah destroys it. Energy is created and destroyed. Allah creates it, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can destroy it. Point being that, for Aristotle, and for the Muslim philosophers influenced by him, God was not the creator. God was not the object of worship, the object of veneration and love. No. He was some philosophical entity whom they had called the prime mover, the unmoved being, the first cause. There was no Jannah and Nar. You were to ask the Muslim philosophers, what's going to happen in the afterlife? They would have told you, and these people claim to be Muslims, they would have told you, there is no akhirah. These are just fables. You're not supposed to accept the Qur'an literally. Allah will not resurrect the dead. Allah will not have a day of judgment and call us to account. There is no such thing as a real Jannah and Nar. If you were to ask these Muslim philosophers, is God characterized by any attribute at all? Is He knowledgeable? The Muslim philosophers wrote explicitly in their works that this unmoved mover whom they called Allah does not know, cannot know what man is doing. Allah does not know what we are doing right now, according to the Muslim philosophers. Because they took Aristotelian philosophy, Aristotelian logic, Aristotelian cosmology, and they fell into it completely and wholeheartedly.